Did you know that Percy Bysshe Shelley wrote Ozymandias? Did you know that Percy Bysshe Shelley maybe had some issues with authority figures? Did you know that Ozymandias' name was also Ramses II? Well, you would know those things and so much more if you'd watched part 1 of my analysis of Ozymandias. This is part 2, so I do recommend that you watch that bit first so that this bit makes much more sense to you. So if you haven't done that yet, go do that now. But for you clever people who have already watched part 1, welcome to part 2. In this video I will finish analysing the poem, I'll think about the poem's themes, as well as its meaning, mood and motivation, and as ever, that optional revision task for you as well, because I'm so nice like that. So with all that out of the way, here is part 2. This is where part 1 of my analysis of Ozymandias left off, with the poem's final 6 lines and 6 questions for them. So without any further ado, let's get stuck in. Simply put, pedestals are things that we associate with power and authority. Ozymandias' statue is on one, reminding us that he did have power once, just that it's faded. King of Kings and Ye Mighty are religious references, and so a religious tone is contained within these phrases. This religious tone implies arrogance, as Ozymandias thinks that he is better than God. Imperatives are command words, and Ozymandias is trying to command God. By trying to do that, Ozymandias is depicted as being incredibly arrogant. Ozymandias wants God to lose hope because of the grandeur of his works, suggesting that Ozymandias feels incredibly proud and that he thinks his works are the best. This is once again an example of his arrogance being highlighted. The highlighted image is one of decay and ruin, which shows that despite his arrogance, Ozymandias' empire has crumbled. Nothing is left. Shelley may be trying to say that arrogance gets you nowhere. Something that I really love about poetry is how it uses sound. Indeed, my favourite poems are ones that are really sonically tight and have lots of patterns of sound weaved throughout them. Because of this, I like to think about what sound patterns achieve in a poem. A really generic but I think useful bit of analysis to have of this in mind then is that alliteration, consonants, assonance, sibilants, etc. all emphasize and amplify the ideas contained within the words that exhibit those sound patterns. So in this example, the last line and a half of the poem is about how empty the desert is. And so I'd argue that the alliteration in those lines, the repeated B in boundless and bare, the repeated L in lone and level, and the S in sans stretch, they only emphasize that notion of emptiness and nothingness. And before we move on, I would just like to have a quick think about the poem's form. And so the question is asking you to consider to what extent this poem is a sonnet. I've included the rules or conventions of a sonnet up there too, but if you want a more in-depth explanation of those rules, have a quick look at the first part of my analysis of Sonnet 43, a link for which is appearing on screen right now. So this poem could be argued to be a love poem because Ozymandias seems to love himself. Yep, it's 14 lines long. It's more or less written in iambic pentameter. Certainly almost all of the lines have 10 syllables. The first 8 lines sort of set the scene, so I think that counts. And yeah, there is a turn because in the final 6 lines the poem places more of an emphasis on what Ozymandias said rather than what he did. But the poem doesn't use one of the traditional sonnet rhyme schemes. So the two notable exceptions to the sonnet form were the poem's rhythm and its rhyme scheme. The poem's 10th line is a clear exception to iambic pentameter. I'd make it out to be 11 syllables. Now this line is Ozymandias talking about himself. This could suggest then that Ozymandias thinks he is better or more than everything else, which might reflect his arrogance. The atypical rhyme scheme could be Shelley acknowledging that everything fades eventually, from the authority figures of politics to the authority of poetic tradition. Okay, so that is the whole poem analysed in depth, and now we are going to consider the 3 M's of the poem. And if that means nothing to you, I do recommend that you have a quick look at the second video in this series, which is the second part of my analysis for The Manhunt, a link for which is appearing on screen about now. So there is my summary of the poem. I tried to sort of think of it as a story. So what do you think? Have I missed out anything really crucial? And there we have my summary of the poem's mood. The poem's mood does change quite a bit, and so I've tried to cover all of its changes. What do you think? Feel free to disagree with me and give me your ideas in the comment section down below. And there we go, that is what I think might have been Shelley's motivation. It seems that Shelley was not the biggest fan of people who had power, be that the monarch or his father, and so I think that this poem was maybe a slightly veiled stab at people with power. What do you think? Notice how I've used a number of evaluative verbs in my answer, as well as a few short embedded quotations. Here we have a theme table, and again this is something that I explained in the second part of my analysis of The Manhunt. To be really quick, I think you might find it useful to have a really large table that contains those themes on the top, and then down the side all of the 18 anthology poems. So if I was filling out the grid, this is what I might have done. I'd say this poem is about power, both the power that Ozymandias thinks he has and the power of time and nature that is shown to be superior to him. I've said that this is a nature poem because the natural world has outlasted Ozymandias and is shown to therefore be more powerful than him, but I could see why you might say it's not a nature poem. I'm calling this a love poem because it is a sonnet and Ozymandias clearly loves himself. This isn't really a war poem though, despite Ozymandias' reputation for being an excellent military leader. This is definitely a time poem. It is time that has taken power away from Ozymandias. I almost ticked place, but I don't really think it's got enough about it for it to be considered a place poem in a really strong or convincing way. As much as he might think he is a god, Ozymandias was very much just one man. Although Ozymandias is dead, the poem is not about his death necessarily, so I don't think I can call it a death poem. I could very much see an argument for this being a Death of the Empire sort of poem though. I have ticked religion for this poem, as Ozymandias, in his arrogance, thinks he is superior to God. I would say though that there's not too many other explicit religious references in this poem, so you would have to make those lines do a lot of work if you chose to use this poem for a comparison question about religion. So that is what I think, but what do you think? Please do let me know how you would have filled this grid out and why down in the comments section below. Once again, we are going to be using Venn diagrams to help us revise. They're a nice visual way to see similarities and differences between poems and can be useful for those of you who are maybe more mathsy and sciencey. So set up a large Venn diagram on a piece of paper with the question, how is power presented across different anthology poems, as its title. Give one circle the title of Ozymandias, as it will be for that poem. As for the title of the second circle, that's your choice. Which anthology poem will you compare Ozymandias to? I mean, you could pick London, which has powerless civilians. You could pick Dulce, which shows the power of war and the powerlessness of soldiers. You could even pick Cozy Apologia, which is about the power of love. Once you have chosen your second poem, complete the Venn diagram. Use the middle bit to include details of any similarities that the poems have. So, do they use language or imagery or structure in similar ways? Do they use titles in similar ways? And so on. Use the non-overlapping bits to write down the comparable differences. So what only happens in Ozymandias? What only happens in the other poem? Remember that you can include both ideas in the Venn diagram. For instance, both Ozymandias and the second poem are about such and such. But you can also use techniques too. So both poems use enjambment too. Both poems use similes too. Only Ozymandias uses adjectives too, and so on. Whatever you're doing though, make sure that you are using quotations. So if you've listened to that guidance and read the instructions on your screen, and no worries if you need to pause or rewind the video to get a better idea, then you might end up with something a bit like that. So here is my example. I chose to compare Ozymandias with hawk roosting. I've put in two similarities as well as two comparable differences, which I'd colour coded for the sake of clarity. And if I was making this for real, I would definitely do that so my notes are easier to decipher and understand. I have specifically not used too many quotations in this example, but that was only so you don't just copy my example without using your brain. In your version, you would obviously add quotations to every single one of your ideas. And if I was doing this for real, I would also make sure that I had more ideas than just these 4. I'd probably go for 5 or 6 or 7 or maybe 8. I certainly believe that the more comparisons you make, up to a point, the better. So Ozymandias, done. Well done for getting all of the way through these 2 videos. I really do hope that they have helped you with your English literature revision, and that you feel much more confident with this poem now. If this video has helped you out, then please do let me know by giving it a like, and why not subscribe to my channel and turn on the notification bell as well. That way you will get all of my GCSE English revision videos straight into your subscription feed, and there is plenty more of those to come, I do promise. Feel free to use the comments section down below, either letting me know how much this video has helped you, or asking a question about the poem, or even adding some of your own ideas and bits of analysis, which I think would be brilliant to see. Doing any of those things also helps my videos to reach even more people. So please do help me to help even more people. As ever, I hope that you have an awesome rest of the day. And do remember to take frequent, short breaks from revision, as a burned out student is not a happy or successful student. So, what is more powerful than man? Well, it turns out, if we look at the example of Ozymandias, that both time and nature are more powerful than man.